Hello everyone and welcome to episode 8 of the Film Ignite podcast. For all things film and all things TV, this is the place to be. In today's episode, we discuss a topic that has been on my mind recently as I asked the question, what is the perfect movie length? I am very new to actually taking film seriously. Over the past year, I have taken a serious interest in learning about filmmaking and watching films not just for entertainment, but to study them, break them down, analyze them, and get something more out of my movie watching experience. In doing so, I realized that there are hundreds, even thousands of movies that I have yet to see. So, as expected, I began making my way through movies that I knew about or heard were good. In my search, I found a running pattern within the films I watched. It occurred to me that a lot of the movies I was watching were so long, but I was really loving all of them. But before we start talking about long movies, we need to define long. What does a long movie mean to me? I consider a 90-minute movie short. Not that there's anything wrong with a short movie. There are some fantastic movies that run at 90 minutes. A Quiet Place 1 and 2 both clock in at 90 minutes. Some classic animated movies like Toy Story clocking in at 1 hour 20 minutes. The Lion King at 90 minutes, and my favorite animated film, Fantastic Mr. Fox, sits at 90 minutes as well. The original Halloween from 1978 is only 90 minutes, along with a lot of classic horror like Frankenstein and Dracula. 90 minutes is honestly an underrated runtime for a movie. A lot of 90-minute movies have a goal and achieve that goal because with such a limited time, you need to understand how to use it effectively. Also, a 90-minute movie is a much easier investment because if the movie turns out bad, you won't have wasted that much time. The downside is that there is not as much time to dive deep into the world or have crazy complex narratives and characters. Regardless, a lot of 90-minute movies work because the time constraint allows for a more focused film. An even greater feat is if a shorter film can leave me wanting more. The area where I find the most amount of mediocre films is the 120-minute mark. This is where the movie clocks in at 2 hours. The problem I have with some 2-hour movies is they aren't concise enough to feel like a shorter movie, but aren't epic enough to feel like a longer movie. I think around the 120-minute mark, give or take 15 minutes, is the average movie length. This gives the story more room to breathe, and it also gives a chance to focus on more aspects like characters, plot, setting, and more opportunity to flex real filmmaking. It also gives a chance to fumble all those aspects and bore you. Or how many times have you seen a movie where some things were set up and never paid off? Or things felt rushed just to get to the end. 2-hour movies are so hit or miss because they are made to appeal to the general audience in a way that keeps them interested but doesn't always pay off. Don't get me wrong, there are hundreds of 2-hour movies that are great, but it's more hit or miss than shorter movies. Now we get to the category that I love, because long movies are my favorite. There are so many of my favorite movies and straight up all-time classics that are 2.5 hours long or longer. 2.5 hours is what I consider a long movie. These are movies that your average moviegoer might be hesitant to sit through without at least one break. But look at all the movies that fall in this category. Inception, 2 hours 45 minutes. Interstellar, 2 hours 45 minutes. Avengers Infinity War, 2 hours 40 minutes. Avengers Endgame, 3 hours. The Godfather, 3 hours. The Godfather Part 2, 3.5 hours. Goodfellas, 2.5 hours. Casino, 3 hours. The Departed, 2.5 hours. The Irishman, 3.5 hours. The Wolf of Wall Street, 3 hours. Pulp Fiction, 2.5 hours. Django Unchained, 2 hours 45 minutes. The Hateful Eight, 3 hours. Now, you may have noticed a trend here. These are mostly Nolan, Tarantino, and Scorsese films. Well, there's also The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly at 3 hours. Heat at 3 hours. Blade Runner 2049, 2 hours 45 minutes. All 3 Lord of the Rings movies clocking in at almost 4 hours apiece. Schindler's List, 3.5 hours. Apocalypse Now, 2.5. All these movies are over 2.5 hours and all have this larger-than-life epic feel to them. Why is it that I find myself gravitating towards longer movies? One of the reasons is that it's very rare that I get enthralled in a movie, and I mean totally 100% immersed within the world. This only ever happens with longer movies, and this doesn't mean that all long movies move at the same pace. Take The Godfather Part 2 for example. That movie is the definition of slow burn. It runs at a snail's pace, but takes its time with the narrative, fleshing out the characters, making you feel every moment of every scene, presenting you with the atmosphere of New York. Then you could see a movie like The Wolf of Wall Street, with its insane editing, zany situations, and wild acting, makes the 3 hours fly by with how much crazy stuff is going on. Longer movies are able to utilize their runtime to make it work to its advantage. As you can see, a lot of longer movies are telling stories about people rather than focusing on plot. With this autobiographical feel to them, you can see how important it is for the filmmaker to show every aspect of day-to-day life. Like in Goodfellas, you see the history of how Henry Hill became who he is and all the people he met and how their day-to-day was. Or in Pulp Fiction, you spend lots of time with new characters learning about them, their history, their backstory, who they really are. A bigger runtime can also help your story's plot, like in Interstellar, the epic journey to the Tesseract, and the big set pieces with waves and the docking scene, and the spectacle and thrill of time travel, and the emotional turmoil it set for Cooper and his family. It gives the films a weight to them. Longer movies aren't just something you throw on to casually watch. They demand your attention with every scene, begging you to become immersed in their world. That is why I think I love longer movies so much, because a lot of them are good. And the main reason for that is they are mostly done by established filmmakers who have already made a name for themselves and are proven worthy of being given a 2.5-hour time slot. Most theater companies love shorter movies because it means they can fit more showings into their theater, meaning more revenue for them. Longer movies, in my opinion, provide so much more substance and more of a chance to build a world, set it up properly, and execute on an idea, character, or storyline. That will make for an engaging viewing. I personally have no problem watching longer movies. In fact, I prefer it. If I'm paying $15 for a ticket, I want my money's worth. I am also one of those people who can easily sit through an entire movie, start to finish, without any breaks or pauses. I did it with The Irishman and Zack Snyder's Justice League. I like watching films the way the director intended, and taking breaks seems to ruin the flow of the film for me, as I'd rather be continuously engaged without stopping than jumping back in. I like to keep the momentum flowing, because that is what the director had in mind, whether it be a slow burn, where I want the mystery or tension to continue to rise, or a fast-paced thriller, where I want the excitement to continue. Yes, there will of course be times when I'd rather just watch something shorter, and there are hundreds of great shorter movies. But for me personally, I'd rather watch a longer movie. There are no objective statistics that say the longer movies are better. I just personally find that a longer film is able to hook me and keep me engaged better, and I just really love the epic feel they all have. It all makes for a great movie experience. With the release of lots of new movies on streaming, it's becoming easier and easier for people to release longer movies, knowing that they can be paused and rewound as the viewer pleases. So it does seem like most movies are getting longer nowadays. This is why I think lots of movies fall into the 2-hour mark, because they want to fill it with as much content as possible, but sometimes that just isn't what audiences want. I would be totally fine if filmmakers were able to not have to be confined to the present times of movies nowadays. Some movies feel like they could have been an hour 45-minute movie, but stretch themselves thin just to fill that 2-hour time slot. I rarely feel that with longer movies. Yes, okay, there are arguments to be made that some 3-hour movies could have parts in them that could be cut out to make the movie shorter. It is rarely ever in benefit of the film. It just happens to work out nicer for audiences when they see a nice clean 90 minutes or 120 minutes rather than the daunting 170 or 180. We're living in a day and age now where people are becoming less and less patient. Content is being produced at a faster rate, and people's attention spans are getting lower and lower. People used to have to wait a week to watch an hour-long TV show, which was 45 minutes of show, 15 minutes of commercials. But now we just release seasons of 1-hour TV with 10 episodes each year, like giant movies. People still, for some reason, find it hard to sit down and watch a 3-hour movie, but could easily binge 5 episodes of a 1-hour show. I think part of this is that it is not one continuous thing for 3 hours. The episodes change every hour or so, giving a new, fresh start, with multiple setups and payoffs, whereas a 3-hour movie is a long investment for an inciting incident, conflict, climax, and resolution. Why only get 1 in a 3-hour movie when I can get 5 watching a bunch of episodes of a 1-hour TV show without ads? Certain movie genres lend themselves to certain runtimes. Most thrillers want to keep their pace fast and tension high, so they opt for a shorter runtime, as it is easier to consistently create suspense throughout, like the Safdie brothers did with Good Time. Most horror movies are usually shorter for the same reason as before, if their main goal is to be as scary as possible, But we've seen with the rise of art house horror, like Hereditary and Midsommar, that horror movie lengths can be longer for a more dramatic and emotional experience rather than straight horror. Movies that lend themselves to longer lengths could be science fiction movies with intricate plot details with an epic scope like taking place in space. Dramas and movies based on real people are sometimes really long because it tells a deep and enthralling story, like in The Irishman. It really sometimes comes down to the studio telling the director to cut down on their script. We've seen time and time again a movie come out and audiences found something was off, like in The Suicide Squad or Justice League. Then weeks go by and you find out there was an alternate cut of the movie out there that cannot be released. Fans weren't having it and they rallied to get the Snyder Cut released, and it worked. And in my opinion, Zack Snyder's Justice League is one of the best DCEU films. It sends a message about letting a director fulfill their vision rather than having to battle with the constraints the studio creates for them. Should we be letting more directors put out whatever cut of their movie they want, whether it be 3 or 4 hours of something? I cannot answer this question fully because it is a fine line between letting the creators have artistic control, but there is also a business side to everything. The longer runtime means more work hours for the cast and crew, a likely bigger budget for more props and sets, so it's really hard to tell. In my personal opinion, I love longer movies. I know a lot of people don't, and that's okay. There is no one optimal movie length, and everyone has their preferences. Any movie of any length can be good or bad. There can be 90-minute movies that feel like 3 hours, or 3-hour movies that feel like 90 minutes. It's all on a subjective basis. And while movie length does play a big part in the audience's experience, I think we should be more open-minded to longer films, or even shorter films, to widen our horizons to stories we can tell. The Film Ignite podcast is meant to ignite discussion on all things film and TV, so I want to hear from you. What is your perfect movie length? And do you prefer TV shows over movies? Let me know. As always, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you all in the next episode.